This is the committee's third hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its inquiry into the effects of the hybrid learning system on student performance in government and government-assisted schools during the revised COVID-19 restrictions. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments via the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel ParlView, via Facebook and or Twitter. We'd like to remind participants at this time that this is a virtual meeting and there are specific guidelines that will apply, including 1, ensuring that your mic is muted when you're not speaking to help keep the background noise to a minimum. 2, we ask that you adjust your camera so that your face is always clearly visible in the frame. Ensure that notifications on your cell phone or other electronic device in your vicinity are muted during the course of this meeting. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards. We thank you for being with us this morning. We appreciate your time. I'd like to at this time invite members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford? Member Ford, are you there? Let's go to Member Beckles. Member Beckles, go ahead, please. Well, Member Monroe. Are they hearing me?
Hi, pleasant good morning to each and everyone, viewing and listening public, and all other members. Roger Monroe, member.
Thank you. Can we go back now to Member Ford? He seems to have gone away for a bit. Member Singh, go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, all ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to join you, and I'm looking forward to a very productive session. Thank you, Chairman. Avinash Singh, member.
Member Naked. Member Naked, go ahead, please.
Good morning to all. Looking forward to a productive session. Thank you, Chairman. Member David Naked.
Thank you, Member Naked. The other member, members Ford and Beckles are also with us. We will not be having the presence of Member Indassing and Member Sinan this morning, who both have conflicting engagements. At this time, we move to the representatives of the various stakeholder groups coming before us, starting with the Ministry of Education and Mrs. Lendo Batiste Simmons, the Permanent Secretary. Go ahead, please. She's now joining. Well, let's go to Miss Mary Bastian, Coordinator and Guidance and Counseling of the Ministry of Education. Okay, we seem to have been now logging in the members of the Ministry of Education. Let's go to the officials of the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. Mrs. Sherry-Ann Rollocks-Hackett, go ahead, please.
Pleasant good morning. I'm Sherry-Ann Rollocks-Hackett, School Supervisor 3 here at the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy, representing my administrator, Mrs. Denise Toby.
And your colleague, Mrs. John St. Rose.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nadine John St. Rose, Curriculum Coordinator, the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. Very happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Can we have officials of the Private Special Schools Association?
To everyone, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Phyllis Griffith, President of the Private Special Schools Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I have with me Dr. Shara Zoe, Principal of Life Center.
Thank you. Let's go to the official of the Support Autism TNT organization, Dr. Mahes.
Good morning, everyone. I am Radhika Mahes. I am the founder and director of the NGO Support Autism TNT. Thank you very much for including the special needs in this proceeding today.
Thank you. And the Down Syndrome Family Network.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Gani, representing the Down Syndrome Family Network. I'm an honorary board member and the chairperson of the Events and Sponsorship Committee.
Thank you. And the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth Surat. I am the Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association. And thank you very much for this invitation to participate in today's proceedings.
Thank you for being with us today. Officials of the Association of Administrators of Public Special Schools of Trinidad and Tobago. Let's start with Mr. Mundy.
Good morning. My name is Derek Mundy, the President of the Association of Administrators of Public Special Schools. Thank you for having me.
And the official of the Consortium of Disability Organization.
Good morning. I am Jackie Liotto, the president of the Consortium of Disability Organizations. Thank you very much for inviting me to contribute this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Liotto. And the Audrey Jeffers School for the Deaf. Ms. John? Let's go to the Princess Elizabeth Special School.
Hello, good morning. Jared Frederick, Principal for Princess Elizabeth Special School. Thank you for your invitation for contributing to today's session.
Thank you. And Ms. Francisca Monseque of the Cascade School for the Deaf.
Good morning. I am Francisca Monseque, Acting Principal, Cascade School for the Deaf.
All right, let's go back to the Tobago House of Assembly now, Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. Ms. Rollox Hackett, are you with us?
Yes, I am, sir.
Oh, you already identified yourself, sorry.
Yes.
Let's go back to the Education Ministry then, the Permanent Secretary. Are they with us?
Good morning. Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
My name is Leno Baptiste Simmons, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education.
Thank you, and your colleagues.
Good morning, Chair. Mary Bastian, Coordinator, Guidance and Counseling, Student Support Services Division.
Good morning. Leticia Rodriguez Cupid, Coordinator, Special Education, Ministry of Education.
Thank you all. Is there anyone who I have not identified? Okay, thank you all for joining us this morning. I see Member Ford is with us again and Member Beckles. Our 4 objectives in this inquiry are as follows. To assess the effectiveness of the hybrid learning system used by the government and government-assisted schools in curriculum delivery, to compare and contrast student performance using traditional versus hybrid learning systems for similar time periods. 3, to examine the systems and methods used to monitor and evaluate student performance in the hybrid learning system. And 4, to assess the readiness of the hybrid learning system to adequately prepare students for external examinations, or local examinations for that matter. Once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm now going to invite members of the various stakeholder groups and education divisions to make short opening comments, and then we'll start our inquiry, starting with the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education. Please unmute your mic, Mrs. Baptiste Simmons.
Yes. Thank you, Chair, and good day once again to members of the Joint Select Committee, other participants, and members of the public. A hybrid learning system combines both face-to-face and remote distant learning strategies for delivery of the curriculum. The approach of Trinidad and Tobago to the hybrid learning system remains student-centered and seeks to ensure that learners continue to have equitable access to quality education. As such, a multi-pronged intervention involving divisions and units of the Ministry of Education, as well as other ministries and major stakeholders, has been employed. The Ministry of Education would have commenced the hybrid learning system with effect from February 8, 2021 where the Ministry of Health allowed us to implement on a phase basis where students will be coming out. At this time, we have forms 4, 5, and 6 students at school, and this is being facilitated to ensure that they can complete the school-based assessments, internal assessments, and practicals ready for exams. On April 12, 2021, we are hoping that our forms, standard 4 students will be out and for face-to-face sessions in schools. We recognize that our students with special needs are the most vulnerable and at risk due to increased susceptibility to contagions as a result of pre-existing comorbidities. In closing, the Ministry of Education acknowledges that despite our best efforts, gaps in the education system delivery persist. As such, we look forward to sharing our experiences and gaining invaluable insight and possible solutions from fellow participants and committee members. With these few words, I would pause and allow the committee to take the lead in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Mrs. Sherry-Ann Rollocks-Hackett, School Supervisor 3, the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Innovation and Energy. Opening comments, please.
Thank you, Chair. A pleasant good morning to all members of the committee and stakeholders and members representing the Ministry of Education. The Division of Education, Innovation and Energy has been responding to the COVID-19 situation as far as schools are concerned. Our major lead usually will come from guidelines emanating from the Ministry of Education, but given our realities here in Tobago, as a division, we strategize to ensure that our students are taken care of. So during this period, we will have responded in various ways to ensure that our students, the instruction continued, and to ensure that learning took place in the way that it ought to take place, given the new platform that we found ourselves utilizing. As such, we established several committees to roll out a roadmap as to how we will approach the continuing education of our students. We collaborated with various stakeholder groups, including various units at our division and also with leaders within our community here in Tobago. We also are aware that there's some gaps within the system at this point in time, but we have been working assiduously to ensure that our students are not disadvantaged. And also, as we begun face-to-face classes in February, we also ensure that in various necessary sanitization and that is required, that all of those things were put in place. At this time, I will end my opening statement and go over back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Let's go to the Private Special Schools Association. Ms. Griffith.
Hello, good morning again, and thank you so much for this opportunity. So from the perspective of the private schools, I've had to and with
I think Ms. Griffith has some bandwidth problems there. Okay, Ms. Griffith, you can take off your video because you have some bandwidth problems. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is this better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, so again, good morning again to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. With the onset of the hybrid sister organization, and our schools have had to come up with creative systems to ensure that teaching and the spectrum, and they would require extra.
I think we're going to have to go to your colleague, Dr. Sharon Zoe. Let's go
Sharon, yes, go ahead.
Let's
Thank you. Yes, see if it's better from her end.
Let's go to Dr. Zoe and see if we can get it better. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Zoe.
Thank you.
Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, everybody. I will pick up from where Phyllis left off. Well, we have not really been hybrid because we have not been a part of the phases that have gone back in. So we're fully online still. Our students are benefiting from virtual classes in conjunction with prepared packages. Our committee, the PASAT Association, has met several times to see how we can strengthen each other, provide resources to each other, and we've been leading on the Ministry of Education as well. We continue to do that to meet the needs of our students. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mahes of Support Autism TNT.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Joint Select Committee, distinguished persons, a pleasant good morning to all of you. Thank you for including the education of children with autism and other special needs in this session today. The majority of children with autism who are registered members of Support Autism TNT do not attend a government or government-assisted school. In fact, out of 150 members, only 12 are currently attending a government school, while 18 currently attend government-assisted schools. Together, they comprise only 30% of our members between ages 5 to 18 years. 20% of the 150 children registered with us are enrolled in private schools, while the majority, 60%, that is 90 children of a total of 150, are currently not enrolled in any educational institution. The ones who are attending the government and government-assisted schools are the ones who we refer to as high functioning. Many parents consider themselves very lucky to have enrolled their children into a government or government-assisted schools, as many children are turned away as schools cannot cater to their special needs. For those who are students in the government and government-assisted schools, the transition to an online learning has been very challenging. Most of them, all of them actually, are still in an online learning environment as opposed to a hybrid learning environment. Parents and caregivers have listed various factors which negatively impact on their children's access to good quality education, some of which include lack of teaching aids, standardized curriculum and evaluation, amongst others. The children often have difficulties accessing information, they are distracted by noises from the other end and so on. And in order to make the learning environment a more successful one for students with autism, the parents and caregivers have requested that the Ministry of Education facilitate training sessions that will help teachers to engage in a more practical teaching style, that the whole system of standardized evaluation should be replaced with a system that will evaluate students on an individual basis, and that speech and occupational therapists should be assigned to particular schools and districts, even if it is to work with students in an online setting for now. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ghani from the Down Syndrome Family Network.
Good morning to the chair, Senator Paul Richards, and to all of the distinguished members of this panel. Thank you to Dr. Mahes for giving that very succinct overview of the situation regarding children with disabilities, because I think that what she has said applies not only to children with autism, but also applies to children with other types of learning disabilities, in particular children with intellectual disabilities. At the Down Syndrome Family Network, we also recently conducted a survey to ascertain the type of support that our members have been getting from the system. The early childhood care area, we had under 40% of our students enrolled in early childhood care, and about 43% are enrolled in primary school. We have less than 10% in secondary school and about 20% at special schools. We also have about 20% that are in no type of learning environment at all. During COVID, we asked where were they provided with support. They were seen to get support from the Ministry of Education. It was less than 10%. From the Ministry of Social Development, it was about 15%. From the children's schools, it was at about 35%, and teacher assistants at about 15%. What resources have the children been given? Over 55% said that they had been given no support. Lessons packages, 43% were given lessons packages, and less than 10% actually received any type of home visits. We had less than 10% as well having access to Wi-Fi. So that is a significant number of children who actually do not even have access to Wi-Fi. Some of them have learning devices, but they cannot access them. In particular, children with Down syndrome, they learn from face-to-face type of activities. So they have been severely affected by this type of learning environment. In many instances, they see devices as social type of recreational tools and not as educational tools. And therefore, they have not been taught how to learn the devices in order to use them as an educational tool. In addition to that, many of the parents are still computer illiterate or semi-illiterate as well, and cannot help with school type activities. So we are facing a real crisis with regards to our children with disabilities and education, and we look forward to finding some solutions through this avenue. Thank you so much for allowing us to contribute.
Thank you, Ms. Ghani. Let's go to the Blind Welfare Association, Mr. Surat.
Good morning, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here and to be given this opportunity. COVID-19 has given us opportunities. We at the Blind Welfare Association believe that many things that we didn't want to do, we have to do it now. And our students, the Blind Welfare Association, have been providing all who requested books in accessible format. The association has been providing learning material for children we have all over this country, whether they want it in digital format, braille, large print, audio format. We also give out tablets to over 30 children with Bluetooth keyboards so they could use it in the classroom. We have one challenge where the Marrakesh Treaty was approved by the Parliament and the copyright law was amended last year. And thank you very much to the entire Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago for amending the copyright law so that printed material could be in accessible format. When this process started, 500,000 books were available via the ACB, Accessible Book Consortium, and WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, together with NALIS, we having a problem where outstanding from this treaty, there need to be a MOU signed between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and NALIS with WIPO and ACB. Once that is done, the amount of books in accessible format move from 500,000 to over 700,000 right now. We need that MOU to be signed. If that happens, immediately all these books will be available to NALIS in an accessible format so we could redistribute it to children throughout Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm asking the chair and members of the Parliament present here today, if you could pursue that matter before it reaches 1 million books in accessible format. So this is one of the requests from Blind Welfare Association to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and the government and NALIS. Please let us sign that MOU, get that MOU out of the way so we can get that part of the ball rolling. Our children who are blind, the challenge we are having, they are tactile learners or audio learners. Because of online learning, this is done visual. We are suggesting that our children who are blind, especially in the primary school system, be given our opportunity, may not be 5 days for the week, but a couple of days for the week to come into the classroom where the teachers could show them concepts. Because if you are speaking about rows and columns, a child who is blind will not know that unless you could show them how it is done. So this is one of our requests. If using with the hybrid system, bring children back into the classroom, children who are blind or low vision, to develop concept. So when they go back home and the teacher speaks about it, they could link it And the teacher could also use apparatus or devices at home to relate. Our children at the secondary school level, most of them already have the concepts in their head. So it may not be as demanding as a child who is in primary school. So this will be my opening statement for today's proceeding. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Mr. Mundy.
Good morning again to everyone. Thank you, Senator.
Go ahead, we're hearing you. Could you speak up just a bit, please?
Certainly. You hear me here?
Yes, we are.
Okay. The challenges that we have regarding the public special school system is one of structure. I mention structure because of the fact that due to the current structure where you will have primary schools, secondary schools, etc., the special schools are not catered for in the way it's supposed to be catered for. In 2004, we have made a transition from the special education unit into that of Student Support Services Division. And what that would have caused, it would have placed all public special schools under the various districts under school supervisors in the primary school system. The challenge we are having is that when you place us under primary school, okay, our students vary from age, preschool age, all the way up into their 20s. And obviously, you cannot consider adults being primary school age. We are, requesting that you restore what you would have had regarding to the school supervision back into the structure you had with the special education unit, where you will have school supervisors who are knowledgeable and aware of the needs of special schools. The curriculum in the special schools, you would have two curricula, okay? You would have the expanded core curriculum and the core curriculum. Our children with special needs must be properly engaged with the expanded core curriculum, because there in that curriculum is where they will be provided with the necessary skills and knowledge in order to access fully the core curriculum. What this caused, this structure, the structure we are currently, where we are forced into or under primary school, you are no longer having the transdisciplinary team or your interdisciplinary team that is required for developing individualized education programs and to ensure that these individualized education programs are implemented the way it's supposed to be. The curriculum is, because of the fact that that is basically pushed aside by the ministry. I'm talking about the Ministry of Education here. The expanded curriculum is not taken seriously, and the resources that we require to execute or to implement the expanded core curriculum is not provided. Okay? For instance, if you have your students who might be blind or visually impaired, they have to do their orientation and mobility, your braille, or whatever. The expertise or the people who are supposed to provide that additional support, even your braillists, will fall under that transdisciplinary team
Mr. Mandy, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to ask you to save some of that for a substantive discussion.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
but we appreciate you giving some context. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go to Ms. Leoto had an emergency. Let's go to Ms. John. Ms. John from the Audrey Jefferson School for the Deaf, and these are introductory remarks. Go ahead, Ms. John, please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
From my perspective at my school, our students were a little bit fortunate in that the Giselle Foundation provided support for us early on, and we were provided with devices. So all our students have been working online with the teachers. So in terms of that, they are getting a bit of education. It's not the best in terms of the devices are a little small, and the teachers and the students need to be able to see at least the hands as well as the mouth in order to communicate. So apart from the small screen and not having that, that direct communication where they could really tell if the student is understanding, the students are learning and they are moving forward. It's just not at the pace that we would have liked if all things were as normal.
Thank you. Let's go to Mr. Jared Frederick from the Princess Elizabeth Special School.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members and fellow contributors. Special schools have recently been hampered in performing their mandated service to our most vulnerable in society. Poor funding, lack of trained support personnel, lack of qualified school supervision, as well as no curriculum support in the expanded core curriculum for specific disabilities are just some of the issues affecting student performance under regular circumstances. With special schools being forced to move to the hybrid system, the students have now been further disadvantaged. Now added to the regular challenges, we now have to deal with ineffective use of technology, lack of specific training in technology for the students, staff indiscipline, social isolation of students, and signs of fatigue on all stakeholders. Parents of children with traumatic brain injuries, physical disabilities, and moderate to severe learning disabilities lack the training to assist in the educating of these special learners. Hence, the children need in-person education along with professionally trained support staff. There is a widespread assumption that because a student or a parent can use a mass communication device in their daily life, cell phone or tablet, that they are able to use the devices for education. The technology may be the same, but there is a difference between using productivity apps for work, playing games, Facebooking, and online schooling. How can educators be expected to teach children and parents how to use the technology when they themselves are now learning how to create and operate in these online classrooms, breakout rooms, and assessment platforms? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Montague, sorry.
Oh, hi, good day. You were correct the first time, Montague.
Oh, Montague, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Cascade School for the Deaf. We are not operating in a hybrid system at this time. We are fully online still, fully remote. We have used the guidelines provided by the Ministry of Education, but have had to adapt those guidelines to suit the special needs of our children. For example, the amount of sessions we do per day, you know, synchronous and asynchronous. We have had to adapt that to suit our school, and within the school, adapt it to suit the ages and levels of the children. Our children reaching ages from 5 to 17 years old, and as Mr. Mundy would have mentioned, we are not really a primary school, we're special. Primary schools don't have 17-year-olds, you know. So we have had to find creative and innovative ways to reach our children at this time. Our children are visual, tactile learners, And I must say that, you know, our teachers are really, really trying their best to reach our children. Thus far, we have 96% of the student population being accessed every day. As Ms. John would have mentioned too, we would have received devices from Digicel, and we are thankful, but we know as educators of the deaf that that is not the ideal type of device that they need to use in terms of size and, you know, different things. So we're facing the challenges, but we continue to try, and I hope to continue to work with our stakeholders in the best interest of our students.
Thank you so much. Now I want to start, thank you all for being here, and the committee was very specific in its decision to want to deal with students with special needs and organizations that facilitate and support students and the families with special needs as a whole, because very often these organizations are put with organizations that service typical learners, and to be quite frank, they get a squeeze on the side, and we didn't want that. We wanted to hear from the stakeholders because this is an important demographic to the committee and to the education sector. And we felt as a committee, we needed an interface of its own to deal with this because we think it's an important issue. Because just by its very nature, a student with special needs is just that, a student with special needs, which means special accommodation, their diagnostics, and in a very simple definition, clinical and functional special needs or additional needs refers to individuals who require assistance for disabilities that may be medical, mental, emotional, or psychological. It is referred to as special education needs. And in other jurisdictions, there are laws that protect and support students with special needs. And we don't have those kind of legislative framework here in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are heavily dependent on the Student Support Services Division of the Education Ministry. In the case of the Tobago division that's with us today, they have the remit over that and those students with special needs and their families, because the families are also an important dimension to remediating and providing support for these students. And just part of the importance of this kind of interfaces so that the general public gets a sense of what these students and their families are dealing with, and the misunderstandings and the misnomers are cleared up. They are, in a simple sense, 13 or so categories, including autism, deaf blindness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disabilities, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairments, specific learning disabilities, traumatic brain disorder, which was referenced earlier, visual impairment, including blindness, speech or language impairment, and other health impairments. And within those, there are other categories or degrees of disabilities that some learners have and have to deal with. For example, in the case of autism, it's a spectrum, which includes, but not limited to, Rett's, degenerative disorder, Canner's, Asperger's, etc. So it is a wide cadre of issues and challenges that need special remediation, support, and diagnosis, not necessarily in that order. So it's important for people to understand the context within which we are working here, and the fact that if typical learners have faced significant challenges during this pandemic, one can only imagine that the pandemic has exacerbated the situation for learners with special needs who already face challenges in our environment and around the world. So I really wanted the public to understand what we're dealing with here and the importance of focusing on this cadre of learners in Trinidad and Tobago that need, and their families need, the special support. And I wanted to put it into the context of us understanding that we're in a pandemic, and the pandemic has really curtailed economic activity in a large sense. The country was already going through some economic challenges. But even with that said, education as a sector has and continues to receive the largest allocation of budgets. In the last budget, education received $7.973 billion the largest allocation of any sector, followed by health, 6.05 billion, and national security, 5.22 billion. The Tobago House of Assembly received $2.134 billion. And in the last 5 or 6 budgets, education is either first in terms of the most money allocated or second to national security over the last 15 or so years. So education has always been either first or second in terms of receiving the largest allocation. And that's good because it speaks to a country that understands the importance of allocation. But my concern is how much of that is being directed to students with special needs in a real sense and their support and intervention. So with that said, I want to open the questioning with the Ministry of Education in terms of very specific questions. What is the subvention that you have been allocated in the last 3 years and actual subvention received or directed toward the student support services and students with special needs? Question 1. Question 2, how many students with special needs are registered in Trinidad and Tobago? And maybe Tobago can answer on their own in your divisions, registered. So we can start with those questions to the Ministry of Education, please.
Yes.
This is Lendo Batiste Simmons, the Permanent Secretary.
Yes. Yes, good morning. And I must admit, I would not have pulled data with respect to our allocation, and as you said, how much we'd have received in releases and the allocations for our special needs students. A lot of the information that you would be requested would be across the ministry in terms of what is allocated, because it is not simply for resourcing or because I'll have to build from the development program as well as the recurrent. So I must admit that I did not look at it from that asked of the funding. But I hope one would appreciate that while we get the largest, yes, that would be provided. While we get the largest, it is the largest ministry that I think we ever had in Trinidad and Tobago, the Ministry of Education. We have 22,000 employees. I say it every day. And the resourcing and we have quite a lot of expenditure is pretty high. So with that, as we said, I would provide you with the written response. With respect
how many students are registered as students with special needs in the Student Support Services Division?
Right. At this point, I would ask Ms. Cupid or Ms. Bastian to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
First of all, can you hear me clearly?
We are. Could you speak up just a bit, please? We're hearing you, but just a little softly.
Good morning again. Yes. First, I would like to respond with regard to well, in part, not fully, to the allocation. We do have allocation to private special schools that is funded through our program through Student Support Services. That vote is 29 million. That's usually the general allocation. We would have paid through that vote a number of the 13 of the registered private special schools and the grants paid to special needs students in that regard. I can get probably more detailed information to you afterwards, but that over the last few years, we estimated, or I would say around 14, we would have spent at least 14 to 16 million of that on the support for private students at the private special schools. Right, so with regard to that. Your second question with regard to the numbers of students, I just want to, I would like to re-emphasize that the numbers that I will be reporting on here are students referred to student support services. And of those with special needs who we have identified. Currently, we have approximately 3,365 students who have been referred to the special student support services with suspected or diagnosed special education needs. 2,341 of those are what I would say actively being addressed by student support services, pre-COVID. All right. Of that number, only 1,214 of those children are actually now, during COVID, being accessed and receiving direct intervention.
So less than half?
Less than half of the total workload, yes, are being directly contacted at this time. Some of our students, and we acknowledge that a number of our students are still without access. Some students, as our colleagues have mentioned, students are not, this is not the natural or the most optimum medium for many of our students with special needs. I want to endorse some of the previous submissions in the welcoming remarks that many of our students benefit and would benefit more optimally from direct intervention. Special education is a hands-on, very direct service. Student support services, in terms of students with special needs, we provide that therapeutic and educational support to the general education. Most of our students are serviced in the mainstream, in the general education classroom. They're serviced in the general and primary, ECC, and secondary classroom. Student support staff support those teachers in delivery of the curriculum in those schools through the implementation of the IEP, through the implementation of alternative strategies, through teacher education and support, training, etc. So the transition to online has been very, very traumatic for many of our students. And many of them have opted, many parents, many students do not access what is available, even if they have devices. Many of them are still without devices, and I know the Ministry of Education is addressing that by the continued rollout of the distribution of laptops, the distribution of tablets, etc. But we do acknowledge that there is a challenge for our students. The online learning system has actually highlighted some of the difficulties that we know our children face on a daily basis. The prolonged time on the computer has actually triggered some emotional and sensory responses that are not ideal for our students. We have noted, and I wouldn't have specific information on the numbers for that, but we have noted several reports of students with increased seizures, increased episodes, tantrums, etc., because of the prolonged use of the computer over the last year.
And now you mentioned 3,365 students are either suspected or diagnosed. The international benchmark for any population is 10 to 12% of the population would be generally persons who would be suspected of or diagnosed with special needs. So which means our level at 3,365 is quite low. And you get referrals. Is there a mechanism by which the Ministry of Education or Student Support Services is more assertive in terms of trying to diagnose students with special needs to remediate them before it becomes a problem, or in terms of providing support?
Okay, so, well, yes. So let me begin by, again, just emphasizing that the way students, we access students, we are school-based service. So one, the child must be in school for us to, for the student to be picked up. That's one. The child is usually, must be enrolled at a school or in the process of being enrolled or requesting enrollment. Once the child is enrolled and the school or the parent, and sometimes the student themselves refer, we get referrals from all sources, even from other agencies, but the student must be referred. So that is the population I'm talking about. So we have identified from those who are referred to us, 3,365 that are currently on our caseload, currently identified to us with special educational needs. The ministry acknowledges that there are many students who require further identification through the education system. So we try what we call a needs assessment. This is not comprehensive research, but our officers, once we have officers at a school, through our needs assessment, process, we do attempt to filter from this general student population, those students who are manifesting characteristics of special needs. So in that, we are trying to assist the teachers in identifying the students who may have difficulty. We flag them as early as we can and encourage the referral process.
Before I open the floor to my colleagues,
sorry,
to the permanent secretary or any of the persons that she may feel can answer this question, Professor Conrad Dennis, is it Dennis Conrad? I always get it wrong.
Professor Dennis
Conrad.
Dennis Conrad, who is the Director of Student Support Services in an interface last year, said that student support services is under-resourced, overburdened, even before the pandemic, and the pandemic had exacerbated the situation significantly. My information, and this is to the Permanent Secretary, is that since the transfer to Student Support Services Division in 2004, the Student Support Services has never been more than 20% staffed, inclusive of administrative staff. Is that accurate?
Should I answer this one?
To the Permanent Secretary, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, as far as I'm aware, that could be accurate. In the days, what we have observed is over the years, as you have said, is that there's been an expansion. There were years when it would have been up to 50%, because I've been in the system for 20 odd years in the ministry. So within recent time, we have seen an expansion with respect to the Ministry of Education and the needs, special needs, as well as the number of social workers. So those numbers could be accurate at this time because most of the positions are in fact contract positions. And the Ministry of Education and our is set up because these are not the only contract positions. Right now, when we have an advertisement, say for example, to fill a position in student support services, sometimes we might get upwards of 1,000 in terms of applications to process. It takes a very long time. So I know, but we have been working. We have really been trying to fill the positions, but then it comes down to the fact of the economics sometimes in terms of ensuring that we have sufficient funds that are allocated to be able to fill all of those contract positions. Because the majority of positions you're referring to would be contract positions.
Without directing this at you, one can imagine how families of students with special needs feel when the Education Ministry receives the largest allocation, may not translate into releases generally for whatever reasons. And they hear that at this point, with increased and intensified need, that the Student Support Services Division, whose workload is ever increasing, is only 20% staffed at this time, inclusive of administrative staff. So how is that unit ever supposed to fulfill its function effectively in terms of remediating students out of pandemic, now with the needs intensified? And we would admit that 3,365 students is not nearly a scratch on the bucket compared to the number of students who we know as international benchmark may present are in need of either identification, diagnosis, and remediation. It seems like we're shortchanging students and families with special needs in this country. It seems like if I were a parent of a student with special need, I would be very despondent at this point. And this is not directed at you. This is the cry that I've been hearing, and many of the stakeholder groups have admirably submitted a lot of data and information prior to this interface, and the cries are all the same. We are being neglected.
Yes, and Chair, as I said, the Ministry of Education, and again, you can look back at our allocation. As I said, it's 22,000 employees, and it's across the board with teachers. At primary, secondary, we have university, So the allocations will be large. We also carry gate and scholarships. So I'm hearing you. And as you said, we need to relook at the funding and in terms of the allocation to be able to fill these positions. But I want you to also consider the sort of structure that needs to be put in place when you have a unit, because again, as you said, only 20%, but this is like a small ministry within a ministry in terms of size to manage all of that and still ensure that the educational needs of all of our students from ECCE to tertiary are effective.
I think you're making my point. You're making my point for me. Thank you for making my point. Let's go to Mr. Surat, and then I'll open the floor to Member Ford and then Member Monroe. Mr. Surat,
okay,
go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. The Blind Welfare Association, you raised the issue about percentage of persons with disabilities. At the last census taken, I think a little over 50,000 persons were identified with a disability. The association advised through our line ministry that we should consider using the Washington questionnaire to conduct a survey to truly identify how many persons with disability in the country. So we calling upon the Parliament through yourself, if this could be implemented for the next census, use the Washington survey questionnaire, which we provided for. It is a questionnaire developed by United Nations. So if they could use that and conduct to be part of the census, so that we could truly identify who are the persons with disabilities. Also, when we check birth rate in this country and number of children in school, we would certainly see there are a lot of children with disabilities who are not in the school system. And finally, we are suggesting from the Blind Welfare Association, not all children needs student aid. Our children who are, there are two types. Well, we look at the children who are just blind, like the dominant disability, the only disability is blindness. They really don't need a student aid. What we are suggesting to the Ministry of Education, create itinerant teachers so they could go to the different school, work with the teachers, work with the students to give them the skill set that they wouldn't usually get in a school system, but how to cope with their blindness. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to ask in the most polite form, because we have a lot to get through, that contributions be as succinct as possible. Mr. Frederick, followed by Dr. Mahes, and then Ms. Griffith, and then we go to Member Ford. So, Mr. Frederick, you're next, please. Go ahead.
Yes, Chair. One of the things that need to be highlighted, Student Support Services Division can only speak to inclusion education. They are designed for inclusion education, and yet they are tasked with partnering with regular special schools, which do not fall under that. And I think funding-wise, special schools need their own unit that is not so stretched with trying to deal with the entire education population and still trying to service us and give us the assistance that we need with these. We need beyond teachers. We need the technocrats. We need the mobility specialists. We need the occupational therapists. We need speech therapists. We need counselors in the school. Imagine a child that is born with no voice, no hand movements. They basically only move their eyes. How is that child communicating? That child is emotionally locked away from communication. And yes, we have the technology, but who's training the teachers to use the technology or training the child 6 to 7 hours a day in how to use eye control technology? Also, most of the information that you requested concerning numbers could be found in the ministry's recently released 2020 annual statistical report. A copy should be made to the committee, which has a lot of the numbers in how many children with disabilities are recorded in the public school system. Thank you for this opportunity.
What document is that again, please?
That is the 2020 annual statistical report of the Ministry of Education.
Thank you. Dr. Mahes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are some serious issues regarding the hiring of teaching aides. There are cases where the contracts of the teachers' aides hired under the OJT program has ended and the students are left without an aide. These teachers' aides were told to reply under the Ministry of Education, and they have been waiting for a response on their application status for months now. In the meantime, the students are left without a teacher's aide, and this has impacted negatively on their learning and development. I would like to ask, how is the Ministry of Education addressing this disconnect and the rehiring of teacher's aides? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffith, and then Member Ford, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm leaving my camera off because of the connectivity issues.
That's all right, thank you.
Okay, so mention was made about funding and so on. So the private special schools,
That's a really bad bandwidth problem there, Ms. Griffith. We'll have to try to get back to you. Let's go to Mr. Mundy and then Member Ford, please stand by. Mr. Mundy, go ahead, please.
Thank you. The whole problem regarding these special schools, as I indicated earlier, had to do with the structure of the Ministry of Education, okay? Because we're supposed to be able to garner all those figures that were requested of the Permanent Secretary, okay? The fact that you do not have what you will have called a division of special and inclusive education, focusing solely on all schools with children with disabilities, and a curriculum, you don't even have a curriculum officer. There is a post of a curriculum officer for special education that isn't even filled, okay? Our public special schools recently would have, with the whole COVID situation, none of our special schools would have been provided with the basic necessities for COVID. Sanitizing sinks, sanitizing stations, hand sanitizer, etc. All of those things would have been provided to the regular primary and secondary school. When we ask about the special schools, the answer was, it's not in our quote. You have, your funding is different, but we cannot seem to be able to find out how much is our funding, right, for our special schools, etc. I wouldn't go on too long, but this is the disrespect, let me put it that way, that our public special schools face, even basic infrastructural and health and safety challenges that you will probably have in a regular school, but in a special schools, you have to be extra careful with our children with special needs. The basic resources to provide our students, even if, for instance, if we have to provide packages, the School for Blind Children has no Braille production unit. School for Blind Children has always been providing Braille material for our students and students in the mainstream schools. The equipment, when we were locked out of Santa Cruz in 2017, a lot of the equipment missing. Okay, so we have to take our children with special needs seriously, right? And provide them with the necessary resources so that they can at least function in a basic manner.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Let's go to Member Ford. Member Ford, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Member. Again, morning to each and everyone. Morning to Trinidad and Tobago. Again, like all the other commentators that went before me, my question is directed again to the Ministry of Education, and it's in sync with what the Blind Welfare Association mentioned, the Down Syndrome Association, the whole consortium of disability organizations. And the question is, in the submission of the Down Syndrome and all the other organizations, they highlighted one of the shortcomings of the blended hybrid learning system, and I quote, "There is a need for dedicated resources to formulate programs and educate parents and teachers aids on how to use the system. All right, and my question this morning is, has the Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education conducted training sessions with parents or special needs teachers to successfully optimize the virtual learning environment for the benefit of special needs students in Trinidad and Tobago? And I think that question is in sync, Mr. Chairman, with all the other questions of the comments made by all the previous speakers from the various associations represented here. Thank you.
Education Ministry, could you care to respond, please?
Yes, I would also ask Mrs. Cupid or Ms. Bastian to assist where necessary. As COVID-19 and in terms of the lockdown for students, the Ministry of Education would in fact have taken an initiative to ensure that all teachers were trained, as well as special needs. So before me, up to this week on Monday, the head of that unit was training persons in special education needs, the teachers. So I have before me quite an extensive list of training that has been conducted. We have also, that unit has also reached out to Dretchi, the Down Autism Society, School for the Blind, Lady Hochoy Home, in terms of ensuring that they were invited to participate in the open educational resources hosted by our training unit. And I have in front of me quite a lot of training that has been conducted. Starting, we had October 20th, I had 108, defined blindness and visual impairment, October 27th, and all of these are training, and I have quite a number of persons, both at the secondary, the primary, and special needs teachers, everyone there. Persons with especially discuss techniques to help communicate with students who are blind and visually impaired. I have 93 attendees on that day, November 3rd. And recently, March, as I said, March 16, we had the training, we had 358 in terms of total attendance. So from October to March, I have quite a lot of training, training sessions that have been held. As we said, we know it is not going to be totally adequate. We have also targeted parents, and we have put together an entire schedule because we have been targeting parents as well. And that schedule is also rolling out. So
when
the Ministry of Education had taken that initiative. Hello?
Madam, yes, when the teachers are trained, are they being trained for a specific disability that has been diagnosed?
What we have been doing is that we targeted specific areas and those who came on board. What I was advised is that my team would have reached out to a lot of our stakeholders, as you said, in the various associations. Specific ones responded, and we have been working with them specifically to ensure that those resources and the training are rolled out. But we have also had the general training for all. So all of them are identified. Deaf and hard hearing, I have here accessibility, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, students with executive functioning challenges. So it's an inclusive education. It's quite a lot of training that is being rolled out at this time. It's part of our program.
I don't want to get into the debate about whether it's inclusive or not inclusive, because it's not inclusive. You know that.
Well, I know, but what I'm stating is that my team, what we have done is that we try to target, because everything is online. And one of the things I must admit is the response that I got from the team in terms of timelines and ensuring that we were trying to bring everyone on board in terms of training, as well as being able to provide them with the devices.
And I just want to, I know you're in the hot seat here and you have to field the questions because it's the education ministry you're representing, but you would also hear the frustration in some of these groups because the submissions they've sent to us have in large part have indicated that there seems to be a communication issue with the education ministry from most of the stakeholder groups that have sent submissions in terms of turnaround and response time for and these are the NGOs primarily, in terms of the turnaround time for communication responses and appeals for assistance and remediation. So while it is not directed at you personally, you're representing the education ministry. So I just want to make sure that you're not taking it personally.
Okay, no, I'm not taking it personally. So can I ask my team, Ms. Letitia Cupid, to respond?
Thank you so much.
What you would have just said in terms of the turnaround.
Yeah,
thank
you.
Ms. Letitia.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, we're hearing.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Could you repeat the last question? I've lost audio.
The question has to do with most of the submissions that we got from stakeholder groups, and these are primarily NGOs who are working on the field, picking up the slack, as it were, the gaps because of the shortcomings that the student support services and generally, that they don't receive timely responses for communication generally or intervention from the Ministry of Education. They said, and even if they receive an acknowledgement of the communication, the response, the practical response is almost non-existent, so it's frustrating.
Well, I am not sure which specific communication we are referring to, because, but if it's with regard to student referrals,
yes, it's student referrals and appeals for assistance and support.
So yes, we do acknowledge with the level of staffing, you would recognize that with the number of persons, particularly with special needs, who need to be serviced by the system, the limitation of staffing does impact the turnaround, the time, and we acknowledge that the time, because it's just so many, a limited number of officers can do. Keeping in mind that we receive referrals from various sources. Most of our, student support services, special ed unit receives referrals from almost every organization, in addition to every...
What's the quantum of requests for assistance you've received in the last 9 months?
Wow. So Richards, I wouldn't have that exact number in the last 9 months.
Give me a ballpark figure.
Remember, it's a rolling... Yeah, I don't have the numbers. I will ask Ms. Bassin to give me, in the last 9 months, the hotline figures.
Sure. Chair, based on our feedback coming from the number of calls received via the hotline with regard...
Go ahead, we're hearing you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
Sure. Based on the hotline calls that we have been getting since March of 2020, we noticed that almost on a daily basis, about 15 calls may come requesting some sort of information or for additional assistance for students with special needs. So it can be quite a bit.
Thank you. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you've been able to make some progress and you have 8 clinical psychologists and 8 social service workers. And could you give us a breakdown on that? And what's their caseload per officer at this point? And I'm going to ask Member Monroe to stand by with your questions, please. So, Ms. Rodriguez, can you give us a sense of what the staffing is like and the caseload per officer?
That's the DPI, right?
Yes.
Sure. So I can begin by giving the staff information for the psychologists that we have on staff. Currently, we have 5 behavioral specialists. We have 9 clinical psychologists and 9 school psychologists.
So 23 professionals.
Currently in that unit.
So that's about 40 to 50 per professional, depending on the diagnosis.
What I would say as well, in addition to the psychologists we have on board, we have also engaged external professionals for the outsourcing of any additional psychoeds that we need. That is we have recently gotten approval for the provision of outsourced services for psychoeducational assessments, and we are currently working on the speech and language and occupational therapy, so that as we move forward, we have identified that these are critical needs that we have in the past met that need, but with budgetary restraints in the education system, that was terminated for a short time. But we have recently got approval for the outsourcing of services, again, through the university clinic and some other professionals. So we will be addressing any shortfall. So we are hoping that that would address the shortfall in what our division has the capacity to do and the speed.
Thank you. When I hear budgetary restraints, and I know the ministry has received in some instances in excess of $11 billion, in this instance, $7.9 billion, the question, the red flag goes up automatically in terms of the allocation of that and the importance being placed on special needs and special needs organizations and children with special needs in Trinidad and Tobago for the mere fact that at the end of the day, something has to be done more definitively where support is being provided. I know Ms. Ghani is standing by, and then Member Monroe and Member Naked, you can go ahead with your question. So Ms. Ghani, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Paul. Well, of course, I've been listening to all of the comments, and you know, mine is more of a statement that I feel that the existing system really is failing our children with special needs. You know, the system itself needs to be totally redesigned, because I think we all have to be on the same page with regards to the understanding of inclusion and also the understanding of the universal design for education. This means that special schools as well have a place, but there also needs to be more integration of children who have intellectual disabilities and disabilities like being hearing impaired and sight impaired that have nothing to do with the functioning of their intellectual capacity to learn. They, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of the international organizations, have total ability to be mainstreamed once they have the support through devices, through proper teaching methods, and access to physical access to the schools and facilities in a normal learning environment. When I say that, I mean not in the COVID scenario where we are faced with the challenge of having to do a blended type learning system. But if we are looking towards reintegration post-COVID and in the new dispensation, then those are some of the things that we need to really address. I know that in the recent UNESCO GEM report, and I would just want to, please indulge me to just read a couple of the statements that they had. You know, that the challenges include differing understanding of the word inclusion, lack of teacher support for an inclusive scenario, absence of data on those excluded from education, which we have heard here that we don't know the numbers that we're dealing with, inappropriate infrastructure, persistence of a parallel systems and special schools, and lack of political will and community support. So it also involves changing perceptions of what children can achieve, because in many instances we think that the children cannot achieve, which we have seen as a myth, because when they are provided with the correct environment, they can achieve, and they do achieve. And we see that in some of the self-advocates with Down syndrome who are now working in jobs, you know, and these are not token jobs. These are jobs that they have been given based on their ability to perform in the workplace. So we really need to get to, you know, to the point where we do a complete assessment of the system with a view to changing it so that it can cater and look at some of these best practices that we have around us. We don't need to recreate the wheel, and I know the ministry was looking at a pilot project which never got off the ground for whatever reason. And I hope that, you know, these discussions will help us to really move towards that.
Thank you, Ms. Ghani. And, you know, there's little or no debate on inclusive education is clearly defined as education where persons with special needs are accommodated as far as possible in a general education classroom setting, unless it is an extreme situation where special accommodation is needed. So schools for the deaf and schools for the blind in most jurisdictions are anathema to inclusive education, because students with hearing impairments or visual impairments can be accommodated in the general ed classroom in most cases. And in the extreme case, then they're given special teacher support or special support. So there's a general ed teacher and a teacher assistant and a special ed teacher in the classroom to remediate students with special needs. And one of the reasons that is so important is that students with special needs have to eventually live in the real world. So it's been proven by tons of research that the combining of students in a general ed classroom in an inclusive setting is better for the typical learner and also the learner with special needs. So we really have to move more in the direction of what is the international global best practice for inclusive education, and stop having all these fragmented approaches, because it just convolutes the situation, in my opinion. Member Monroe and then Member Naked, go ahead. Apologies for ranting.
Thank you, Chairman. Good day to all members once again on Trinidad and Tobago. Today, my questions will be directed to the Association of Administrators of Public Special Schools. Your submission highlighted that while special schools have received assistance with devices, in some cases, the appropriate assistive technology for the special needs students, such as screen readers for the visually impaired. And my first question, it's a two-part question. What is the estimated cost to equip these devices with the appropriate assistive technology? And two, has the Ministry of Education assisted in equipping these devices with the assisted technology?
Ms. Griffith, go ahead, please. Or Dr.
For Mr. Monday, I believe.
Oh, it's from Mr. Mundy. Go ahead, Mr. Mundy.
Yes. The average price for a screen reader is around $6,000. Now, if you're purchasing that screen reader as a site with a site license, it will cost much less per unit, right? Other screen readers, you also have your screen magnification software, and also you have other technology like your refreshable braille display, which instead of a student wanting to use or a person wanting to use a screen reading software, they can read the braille of a refreshable braille display to use a computer. The software that we requested was not provided. You had another software that was used on the computer that is not as effective and doesn't work efficiently enough for the students to really perform well using the computer. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. And you can also supply more information in writing. Member Naked, go ahead, please. I think you need to unmute Member Naked.
Is that better?
Yes, that's
Hello?
fine. Thank you.
Yes. Before I get into the substantive questioning, I heard from someone from the Ministry of Education concerning the clinical psychologists that have been sourced and employed. How many of those psychologists are actually child psychologists, since we are dealing with child education mostly, children education? How many of those psychologists are actually child psychologists?
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes. Our psychologists, the psychologists who are employed by the Ministry of Education, they are clinical psychologists who are trained in the assessment of learners from early childhood through to adults. They would have practice in that area. So our psychologists are trained. We have school psychologists as well as clinical psychologists. So they are in that. A child psychologist may specialize in a different, they have a specialty for developmental purposes, etc. But they are well equipped for the purposes that they're employed for within the ministry to assess the learning needs of students.
Thank you. Member Naked, go ahead, please.
Okay, to Mr. Suat of the Blind Welfare Association, you indicated in your submission that students who require physical contact with learning materials should be allowed to attend school for this purpose, obviously face-to-face learning. What has the Blind Welfare Association done in their approach to the Ministry of Education and or the Ministry of Health with proposals and or recommendations to facilitate visually impaired students in the face-to-face learning environment?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Surratt.
Yeah, we've been working together with the Ministry of Education, and we did have a couple online training to train teachers how to assist children who are blind using the hybrid system with the Ministry of Health. We did not reach out to the Ministry of Health, so that could be a consideration, but it was just through the Ministry of Education. I don't know if I could also use this opportunity to raise the issue that the blind welfare have a slight disagreement respectfully to Mr. Monde's suggestion about the screen reading software. We use NVDA, non-visual desktop application, and we also train students how to use it, and it is very good and it is free. We also work with NALIS, and we also encourage NALIS to use that free open source software. So it is working well, and our computer instructor is also teaching it. Follow-up also, there are a lot of ministries who offer help to the disabled. Like our line ministry has the Disability Affairs Unit. What we like to suggest is that a coordinated effort could take place with our line ministry, Ministry of Education, all the other ministries, like Ministry of Sports, Ministry of Community Development, all the different ministries that offer service to persons who are blind.
Thank you. Let's go to Ms. Bastian. I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to firstly agree with Ms. Ghani. Just now, 1 minute with the feedback. I wanted to agree with Ms. Ghani with regards to the importance of inclusive practice and share that though slowly, we are in the process of implementing some movement towards inclusive practice within the Ministry of Education via the Inclusive Schools project. And a large part of the implementation of that project has been focusing on doing training with teaching staff as well as principals. We have conducted quite a number of training on the whole issue of social justice and dispositional factors in working with students with special needs, very much emphasizing the same point that Ms. Ghani was making, that many of these students can learn within the mainstream sector, education sector. So via the Inclusive Schools project, I think Ms. Ghani said it hadn't started. We have started. We started in November of 2019. And of course, COVID came, so we had some challenges with moving forward with implementation by students, but we have been doing quite a bit of training, not only with teachers and principals who actually teach students with disabilities, but teachers within the mainstream, because we believe that students with disabilities can be integrated further and really move the system towards an inclusive one. So we're doing work big a bit.
Thank you. You know, one of the challenges here, before I go to the division, thank you, the Division of Education, please stand by, is that trying to remedy suboptimal performance for children with special needs while trying to transition in a pandemic situation is part of what the challenge is here, because it's almost impossible to do that if the system wasn't working effectively in the first place. So you have different layers of challenges now, and it's almost impossible to get the kind of optimal output you want because you're coming from behind. I apologize. Let's go to the Division of Education, who have been standing by for a while to give us a sense of what they've heard so far and what they feel the Tobago situation can provide in terms of solutions that have worked or the challenges that you may have.
Thank you, Senator Richard. Chair, first of all, I want to respond to some of the questions that were asked prior to the Ministry of Education.
Please do.
And provide the context as far as Tobago is concerned. As far as the allocations are concerned, we have 2 special education schools in Tobago. They are the School for the Deaf, Speech and Language Impaired, and we have Happy Haven. For the School for the Deaf, the allocation is approximately one.
Go ahead, we're hearing you.
Hearing me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, right. The allocation for the School for the Deaf is approximately $1.5 million, and for Happy Haven, it is $2.2 million. And that covers salaries, training, resources, traveling, etc., etc.
How many students are remediated at those institutions?
So in total, we have 113 students in both schools. And those students, we have at the schools necessary personnel to ensure that these students are provided with the kind of education that they require at this point in time. As far as the training is
so just before you go on, sorry to interrupt you. So
yes,
there are no in Tobago. The policy is not to integrate students with special needs into the general education classroom. You have the special schools specifically for those students with those challenges.
We have some element of integration that takes place as far as students at some of our primary school or mainstream primary schools, and also at the secondary level, but in very, very small numbers.
And is there specific support provided for those students in the mainstream classroom?
Well, to a minimal level, at this point in time, we are in the process of engaging teachers' aides for those students. And at the level of the student support, we have officers there who interact with those students to ensure that their needs are taken care of. But ideally, we should really have teachers' aides at the various schools. But at the student support service unit, we have our guidance officers, and we have special ed teachers who do interact with those students.
And of the 130 or so students that you identified at the 2 institutions, what has been the experience in transitioning to a virtual environment during the pandemic? Have you been able to provide the support for them, and what does that support look like?
I want to indicate that the experience has been very similar to what has been indicated as far as nationally. You find that many of the students and their parents lack of devices, issues with connectivity, etc. And because of the types of learners that these children are, you recognize that even after we received devices, because we got devices donated by Digicel, ensuring that at this point in time that all the 113 students, they have access to devices. But the problem lies with the ability to utilize the devices for learning. And as a result of that, together with the principals at the various schools and support services coming from student support unit, we have been training parents to enable the parents to assist the students in utilizing the devices. Because some of the students have difficulty even using the, most of the tablets, even interacting with the tablets that they have received at this point in time. So we have that, and also it was mentioned the Ministry of Education has been rolling out training that also targeted teachers at special schools. Our teachers in Tobago are also participating in those training sessions.
Thank you.
I also want to indicate to you, as far as our student support service, we recently employed 19 new officers, 13 guidance officers, 5 social workers, and 1 school psychologist. So our unit is now 45 at 42 persons who are there to assist our students. We are also part of the National Inclusive School Project. So we have 3 pilot schools in Tobago. So we are working along ensuring that that ultimate goal of inclusiveness, that we actually have that on the ground.
That gives me some sort of warm feeling in my heart. Before you go, and this question is also secondly to the Ministry of Education, and then I'll have Member Naked complete his questioning and go to Member Beckles, who I hope is standing by. What sort of differentiated or differentiation of curriculum have you been able to activate? Because it's one thing getting devices and connectivity. The curriculum can't be the same when it's being delivered virtually or assessments. And for you, that question is for you, and for students with special needs, that is, and also for the Education Ministry Student Support Services. So we start with you on that response in terms of the differentiation of the curriculum for virtual learning and assessment modalities.
Okay, as far as the online assessment is concerned, what has been happening is, yes, the curriculum is not the same, because the assessment at the end of the day, we encourage more authentic and performance-based assessment. So as far as the students at the special schools are concerned, we have had teachers encouraging or giving assessment that require the video taping of what the students have been doing for the benefit of the teachers. And that is usually monitored or they are supervised by their parents in ensuring that these videos are taped, and they will assess them based on that. Some of them involved in e-journals, again, under the supervision of their parents, given their unique disabilities or special needs. In addition to that, the performance-based, and that's largely the way in which we have been assessing our special needs students at this point in time. To some extent, worksheets are utilized that are made available to the parents, and the parents will work again with the students, given their capabilities, and those sheets are then forwarded to the teachers at the various schools.
Thank you, Education Ministry. Same question to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would want to endorse some of the same responses that my colleague just shared. We have attempted at the onset of COVID, we realized that our focus in the initial months would have been to assist our students, especially the most vulnerable students, to make that transition to home-based learning and to the virtual learning environment. We assisted parents with, for example, with strategies for working with the students at home, an increased focus on life skills, communication and social skills. And a lot of these were done through communication with parents. Now, we have to recognize that, like everyone else, many of our parents were not accessible, many of our students were not accessible initially, and therefore a variety of modalities were utilized, including the use of WhatsApp, including the use of the various platforms, but mainly our students were responding more to the development of packages, the preparation of targeted packages that would have identified their learning goals as per their individual education plans.
Thank you. Can I go to Ms. Veronica John and then Ms. Francisca Montague first? Next, sorry, Ms. John, go ahead, please. What your response to what you've been hearing?
Okay, the testing of the students is a bit of a challenge, but in most instances, the teachers are using a lot of project work so that they present a finished piece and they show the process by which they complete the piece. They do have monthly tests and end of term tests to some extent. However, parents sometimes complain that to print the worksheets is a problem because of lack of resources. So if that's the case, then the school will print it for them and they have to come to the school, collect those test papers in a sealed package. They will open it in front of the teachers the morning of the exam, and they have to leave their cameras on so the teachers can monitor. But we still have issues with some parents finding ways to assist the children. And we can tell because when everything is perfectly correct and we know what the children were doing before, we know that they got some assistance with that. And if you ask them the following day, how did you do this? They can't answer. So there are challenges with testing the students.
Go ahead, Ms. Mansiki, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, like Ms. John, you're never really sure if how well the children are understanding the content, because we have had cases too where work is coming back correct, but you know that child would have missed a whole lot of the content itself, So that is a challenge. You can't really say, well, yes, they're understanding, they're not understanding, but we try. All right. So at the end of every month, we have designated our dates to do all the summative assessments. All right. So that at the end of the term, we do have an end of term test to see summative assessments that would add up. All right. We also have a lot of project-based assessments as well too. What we have that is really working for us as a staff is that bi-weekly we have sort of each one teach one sessions, right? Whereby teachers, and I'm happy to say that the teachers who have just come out from UTT are the ones who are leading the way in terms of the technology. Teaching teachers during those sessions. So we learn from each other. We see what this one has tried. Probably we could try that, because we realize that we are our own resource personnel too, so to speak, Even though I work closely with the school's social worker, and my communication with her at this time was basically with parents who would have been going through socioeconomic challenges and, trying to reach them, that kind of thing. But we realized that even with these personnel, knowing sign language and knowing how to communicate with our students is challenging for them. So we end up doing it sometimes, even though we're working with them, that kind of thing. So yeah, as I said, we're doing our little summative assessments. And at the end of the term, we communicate with the parents. I must say too that a lot of the communication with the parents, what teachers would find themselves doing is teaching parents the vocabulary before they actually get onto lessons, right? Because communication parent to child is a challenge. So teachers have been doing that in the best possible way. And they also have regular meetings with their parents, okay? As the administrator, I have not done a general parents meeting. I meet parents according to the departments.
Finished?
Yeah, I think so at this time.
Thank you so much. Member Naki, did you finish your questioning? Member Naked?
Yes, yes. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I had one more question for Mr. Surat.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Mr. Surat, just to paraphrase, you were not completely happy with the present hybrid schooling in regards to the ECCE and primary school children who are blind or visually impaired. So my question would be, other than the need for teaching aids, what are the specific needs of visually impaired ECCE and primary school children not being addressed by the online learning environment?
Mr. Chair, can I continue?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, our children are really tactile learners. So the specific need is to be hands-on. So this is the reason why we are suggesting hands-on teaching for our students. So that is, and pertaining to student aid, because most of our children, based on what we have in the school system, they are just blind. So we are suggesting itinerant teachers who will come in to deal with the specific skill set that that child who is blind needs to learn that they won't get from the regular school system. Example, orientation. What we mean by that, how children learn to navigate their surrounding. Mobility, how to use cane technique so that they could move from one place to the next. Learning about quarter turn and half turn, learning to be aware of their surrounding, learning braille, learning tactile, learning 3D imaging, learning. So this is what we are suggesting a child who is blind to develop or to learn things that the regular school will not teach them pertaining to blindness specifically. So we need that kind of support to teach the child how to cope with their blindness. And also we need to have trained the parents to how to cope with their child who is also blind. So the big question is, what we asking not only the Ministry of Education, but the general public, how do we lift the expectation for a child who is blind? We must believe that that child could succeed. We must believe that that child could live a comfortable life like anybody else in society. So the main takeaway here is lifting the expectation of the child who is blind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Beckles. Thank you for being so patient. You can go ahead, please, Member Beckles. Member Beckles? If not, I'll go to Member Singh. Member Singh, go ahead, please. Member Singh, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Chairman. I wanted to find out from the Down Syndrome Family Network. I have a few questions. I'll just probably pose two of them now. In the submissions regarding the parents, I noticed a couple of the parents was not receiving aid from the ministry. Could the representative from that network indicate out of the 40 parents, some of them did not receive any assistance? Could you identify what type of assistance this entailed, and how did you all go about dealing with that issue?
Ms. Ghani, go ahead, please. Ms. Ghani is Down Syndrome Family Network.
Hi. The survey, as you rightly said, asked the parents to identify if they had a child already enrolled in education, and if during, this is specific to the COVID-19 period, whether or not they had received any sort of support. Now, we have several of the children who actually are on a list with the ministry awaiting, number one, the assessment, because even though you're born with Down syndrome, apparently you still have to be assessed, and also waiting for teachers' aides. We are trying to have our kids in the network mainstream. So we push for them to be included, not to attend a special school. Many of them still have problems being accepted into the typical schools. It may vary from location to location based on the principal at the school not wanting to accept the child. In these cases, we tell the parents that they should go to the ministry and report that they have been turned away, or just turn up every day to the school and push as hard as they can to have the child accepted. So the other thing is that we also feel very strongly that we need new legislation passed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to clearly define the situation with regards to children with disabilities and their access to typical education, because it does state that all children are entitled to an education, but the legal jargon apparently has some sort of gaps with regards to children with disabilities and how they should be accepted into schools. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, and I think you said you had 2 questions.
Yes, Member Singh, go ahead, please.
Before I go to the next question, Chairman, I mean, you would agree with me that we seriously need to do something about the situation, because in my estimation, I mean, all children are supposed to be considered equal, and the opportunity is really supposed to be across the board. So to hear some students being left out, or principals not accepting children, I mean, that is something very startling and very amazing to note in a country like ours, where it should be equality and equity. So my next question,
just Ms. Ghani, the Education Act actually states that each child needs to get the education that fulfills its potential, and each child has different potential and different competencies. So, but the interpretation of that is where we have the issue.
Correct.
My follow-up question, in your contribution earlier, I noted you said that there are a lot of parents, that are not too tech savvy with computers and the technology being used. And I could tell you, I mean, a lot of parents, more traditionally, who have not been acquainted with technology, now is, seeing hell to cope with the environment. So as a network, what have you all done or lobbied for these parents who, are really struggling to, meet the requirements of giving their child the opportunity to study and to be, treated equally and be given that opportunity of education? How has the network been able to effectively reach out to these parents who have not been able to utilize the technology and so on? How have you been able to impact that?
Well, the network over the last year has been, well, we have several mediums. We have a parents chat group, which has about 200 parents on it. And we, almost on a daily basis, we share information with the parents regarding educational matters. So we share from the National Down Syndrome Congress in the United States all of the up-to-date teaching tools. We have shared, access to the reading material that has been done, flashcards, new teaching techniques for children with Down syndrome during COVID. And that material has been shared with them from the time we went into lockdown. We also have quarterly family workshops. So we continue to do the quarterly family workshops online, where again, we engaged with several professionals who again, learning psychologists, they were teachers, and there were parents who also contributed to the sessions, where teaching tools again were shared with the parents. These were done via PowerPoint presentations and other slides and so on. So they have been getting this information on an ongoing basis. next on Friday this week, we will be having our World Down Syndrome Day conference. And again, we have about 6 presenters, international presenters. We actually have a Dr. Velodi from Maryland, who will be presenting on COVID-19 and medical, interventions and things of concern for persons with Down syndrome during COVID-19 as well, and talking about the vaccine and how it can impact or why it's okay for persons with Down syndrome to take the vaccine. So we try to keep very abreast of things. Of course, there are instances where we will have to speak with parents on a one-on-one to give them individual support and where they have specific interventions that are necessary. And we also do that through the one-on-one counseling with them. And a lot of what the network does as well is referring parents to the organizations or the therapists or persons who can help them to get proper assistance for the kids. This included providing laptops to some kids who were financially challenged, which we did through our corporate partners. And also in some cases, like recently, we had a child 5 years old who got a stroke and had to have interventions with regards to wheelchair, medicine, and other things. So it goes beyond education, what the work of the network. But these are interventions that, that are different depending on the child and the need of the child. But our work has definitely, increased because of the need for more support.
Thank you. Member Singh, any more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I want to go next to Dr. Sharon Zoe of the and Ms. Griffith of the Private Special Schools Association and ask how many schools are in the association and how many learners with special needs and or families are in your membership base. So Dr. Zoe.
Sorry, I was giving Phyllis a moment to respond as she's the president. But I'm aware that there are, because I'm just a member, but she's the president. There are about 13 registered private special schools with the association. The numbers vary. So for example, the school I am the principal of, we have 24 students because of the severity of our students' needs. So our students are predominantly students with autism. We have one student with Down syndrome and a couple other disabilities. But our students are moderate to severe on the spectrum. So we don't have what is considered the high functioning students. So our school is a small one, but there are other schools that are part of the association with larger numbers, 200 and stuff like that. I can't tell you what is the total number, because like I said, Phyllis is the president, I'm just a member, but that's from my perspective in terms of our school and the number of private special schools that are part of the association.
Thank you. Ms. Griffith, can you answer the question then?
I am going to try my best and I hope that I don't get bumped off again. So we do have 13.
Go ahead.
With our association.
Could you repeat that, please? We just lost you for a bit there.
She said there are actually 13 schools.
13 schools, okay.
Yes, and we also have 3 other schools who are still part of schools that started with us. They have some challenges, 1 or 2 of them. We have 2 schools who would have been registered under grant funding, but because one school had to move from their location and go to another location, they had to go through the whole re-registration, which up to now, they have not been able to complete.
Your signal is falling out and coming in.
Then we have another school that had some other challenges. I believe when official Are you all hearing me?
We're dropping off. You're dropping off and coming. And I'm going to ask a question, a general question for the organizations. Two questions that we receive from the public. One, do your organizations also receive subventions from the Ministry of Social Development or other government agencies? And what percentage of these funds are actually spent on the students versus the percentage in operational cost and staff? And also, does the Education Ministry have any mechanism in place to track the effectiveness of subventions, disbursements to you, provided by these agencies, and determine if the funds are actually helping students? So the first question, of course, is for the agencies. Let me start with Dr. Mahes on that. Do you also receive subventions from the Ministry of Social Development or other government agencies?
No, we do not receive any subvention from any government agencies.
All right, Ms. Griffith?
Yes, we do get partial funding for 10 months of the year from the Ministry of Education.
Ms. Ghani? Ms. Ghani? Do you receive subventions? Let's go to Mr. Surat.
Yes, the Blind Welfare Association is specifically for a school purpose, but yes, we receive a subvention, and we are governed by an act of parliament, an ordinance, and our funding come directly from the draft estimate budget, and it passes through our line ministry. So not necessarily we get funding from our line ministry, but our funding is reflected in the draft estimate. We are similar to Princess Elizabeth and also here in Impaired. These are the only three organizations that gets that type of direct funding.
All right, Ms. Lioto has not rejoined us, and Ms. John, and then Mr. Frederick.
Yeah, Chairman, Rudran had another thing. At some point in time, I would like to ask one or two questions, please.
Absolutely. Welcome, Member Dassing. We're glad you could join us. Ms. John?
Okay, funding would go to the Trinidad and Tobago Association for the Hearing Impaired. Subventions will go there. What the school will get is funding that it's a very small amount. It's just over $2,000 per year, about $2,200 per year. But subventions will go to TAHI.
I'm kind of stunned. That's why I got thrown off there. 2,000, you said?
Yes. 2,200 was the last.
2,200 per year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frederick?
I think yes, first, it must be clearly that there's a separation between the Princess Elizabeth Center and the Princess Elizabeth Society is separate from the Princess Elizabeth School. However, whatever funding that they receive, we are not aware of, or our entire funding comes from the Ministry of Education. What I want to raise, so we've seen that we were looking at enrollment. Students at Princess Elizabeth are at a disadvantage because we are primary school or rated as a primary school. Textbook and CVQ subjects are not allowed for our students because we don't have the teachers. Primary school teachers cannot deliver those type of content, things like beauty culture, commercial food prep, these things that could afford them employment when they leave us at 17 and 18. Also, we are having problems getting school supervision to allow us to register students for SEA. SEA is a gateway to further education. I've had numerous discussions this year alone that they believe that even though it's the child's right, the child may be frustrated even with the provisions of extra time in the visual room and assistance in the room with writers and readers, that it may be too much for the child.
What you're saying is you are having challenges registering your students for SEA. My understanding is that you are supposed to do that, I think it's the year before the child is supposed to write SEA, and the ministry is supposed to write you back to ask what accommodations you may need. Is that what you understand the process to be?
Registration was between September to November of this year. When I approached it, when I assumed duty in September, supervision reached out to me and told me, why are we frustrating the children even though it's their right, why we are frustrating them to write the exam? School supervision who have no idea.
Who is asking you that specifically?
My direct school supervisor. That is why we keep, yes, and that's why we are saying we have school supervision who is not trained to deal with special schools. They don't have an idea.
Was that an official response from the Ministry of Education?
Yes, sir.
That's somebody giving their personal opinion.
That was the instructions from my line supervisor. I have been having issues with supervision where there is the statutory or duties of a principal, whether acting or otherwise, that is in the Education Act. They are the duties of the supervisor. Supervisors have taken time to override the minister's instructions and the guidelines and how we interact with staff, how we are able to control discipline in the schools.
Mr. Frederick, how many students are you talking about here?
To write the exam, 3 students.
And this is on one occasion, or is this on more than one occasion?
So we haven't had consistent standard 5s writing the exam since I've been at the school. We probably begged to get 3 about 2 years ago to write. We have children with the capabilities.
What do you mean beg? Are you documenting these requests for students to write essay exams?
I only took over in September, but since I've been here, we've had to push the parent, because another thing is parents are afraid of children going to secondary school, they will be bullied. So therefore—
What kind of accommodation were you requesting for these students?
We weren't asking for accommodation, we just wanted the children to write. Yes, they have a physical disability, but it might be wheelchair bound. It may be just a little extra time they may need in the exam. These children have the mental capacity to write the exam.
And have you had a documented response from it? And I hope the Education Ministry officials are listening, because this is shocking.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Member Dassing.
Based on what Mr. Frederick has said, it is shocking, it is alarming, but could I ask, has Mr. Frederick written to the director of what we would call, or the CEO of the Ministry of Education, and by extension,
Education Officer,
and the permanent secretary and so on, based on what he's telling this committee about the behavior of this school supervisor?
Mr. Frederick?
Yes, I have.
And you have the response?
No, sir. Furthermore, when we had discussions with the parents, when it was originally suggested that the children do not write, the parents opted to withdraw the children from the exam.
Thank you. Member Ndassing, go ahead, please.
Yes, Chairman. In addition to that, due to previous commitments which I indicated to the Secretariat, I joined a bit late. But more importantly, I heard in terms of one or two organizations said that they do not receive any funding. Have they applied to, let us say, the Ministry of Social Development, and have they been communicated with why they have not been able to qualify or not enjoy governmental support? One.
Thank you, Mr. Dassing. Just put a pause there. I think it's only fair that I give the Education Ministry a chance to respond to the information divulged by Mr. Frederick and what the standard procedures should be and what his sense of recourse should be.
Okay.
Madam PS?
Chair, good afternoon. I would like Ms. Cupid to intervene, and then I would respond with respect to some of the matters, because I know Mr. Fredericks indicated he wrote. I have not received any correspondence in this matter at all. So I'll ask Ms. Mary Bastian or Ms. Cupid to respond with respect to registration for students or SCA.
Thank you. Ms. Bastian, go ahead, please.
Yes. What Mr. Frederick has well, I was not aware of that, Elizabeth. However, in the past, we have all
I think we have a bandwidth problem with Ms. Bastian. Could the PS take over, please, and respond to the other parts of the question?
so the internet hearing.
Madam PS, could we not hearing Ms. Bastian clearly?
Yes, you're hearing. Yes, yes. As Ms. Cupid was saying, is that this one is up. It's really I've never heard of this incident. I know that students are given the opportunity to write. In 2020, we would have honored students. We had students who would have written the exam, and we would have also, for the first time, we would have honored students and with awards from who would have been special needs students. I'm really stumped. I'm stumped. I'm just stumped.
And I am also stumped.
Yes,
but
I'm really stumped by the fact that.
I'll also tell you that while I applaud the awards I heard this year, it is not the first time I've heard that students have been denied access to the essay examination and or accommodation. So maybe there needs to be some sort of investigation into this practice, which may be not ministry policy, but someone making a decision that's beyond their remit.
Chairman, we do not need to be stumped. We need to launch an investigation and.
Member, I just asked the ministry official to do just that.
And could I, based on where we are now, could I continue with my?
Yes, yes, please do.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes,
it's just to ensure that I get I need the correspondence. Apart from launching the investigation, the matter has to be brought before me. Is that okay, Mr. Fredericks? Can you forward the information to me or to the student support services?
Ma'am, I actually have put something in the registered mail that should be arriving at your office before the end of the week.
Thank you. Member Ndassing?
Yes, Chairman. As I said, I did not get the correct or cannot recall the institution at this moment, but I heard one particular, I think Ms. Mahes indicated that her organization does not get any funding. And my question was, if there are any other organizations before the committee this morning who applied and did not qualify, and were they communicated with in terms of why they did not qualify and how they could in future achieve the benchmark or the criteria to access government funding, also from a special needs point of view. Also, could I ask the CEO of the Visually Impaired Association if the association realizes timely releases from the Ministry of Social Development, and if the workers of the Visually Impaired Association are up to date in terms of their current collective bargaining period, or are there outstanding collective bargaining periods to be negotiated?
So let's go to Mr. Surat, I think it is.
Mr. Chair, collective agreement, yes, that is outstanding. 2 periods, that's 6 years, that is outstanding. And based on releases, yes, we are very appreciative from all governments. We always get, most of the time, over 90% of the time, we get releases on time. So those are the 2 questions I think he asked.
And Mr. CEO, could I, through you, Chair, is the line minister of the Visually Impaired Association fully aware that the collective bargaining periods are outstanding for 2 periods?
Yes, and also we've been in communication with the CPO office, and we're waiting for CPO office to give an offer before. Yeah.
Mr. Surat, thank you for that response. Member Ndassing, that's beyond the remit of this committee. There was a question posed to Dr. Mahes from Member Ndassing.
Thank you very much, Chair. Support Autism TNT is a voluntary organization, and we have been successfully organizing events and activities for the past 6 years because of the contribution of our volunteers. Specifically, we focus on youth volunteerism, and we trained our youths to engage in activities with persons with autism. On that basis, we have not approached the ministry, any of the ministry or government bodies to fund any of our activities. But as we expand, and we're in the process of opening a center very soon, as we expand and we do that, we will approach the ministries for assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I know we've been going for a while. We have been told we have to wrap up. There's another JSC due to take the airwaves. So what I'm going to do is go from...
Chairman, can I ask one question quickly?
Yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Member.
Right, just to follow up on in terms of the autism, I just wanted to get a sense as to whether or not, on a whole, we should do a little more education in terms of autistic children. If there's any comments that this is a follow-up to what was just said. That's my only
Dr. Mahias?
Can you clarify education in terms of the general population or in terms
education to the population, not education to the children? Yeah.
So Support Autism TNT have been actively involved in advocating for an inclusive society. And we have been all over in the public educating people about autism, as well as Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago have been doing that for many, many years. So for us, it is a little more than just education now. For us, it is more getting access to the opportunities for the children more than anything else.
Thank you.
I want to congratulate you for all the work. So I'm not saying that the education hasn't been taking place, and I know you all have been doing excellent work. But my thing is that overall, I just think that the society, in terms of what you're requesting, in terms of the integration and so, that I don't think that the impression is given that people are sufficiently conscious of some of the challenges. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Beckles. And while I know that the organization does a lot of digital work, it's always more important for public awareness. We out of time badly, so I'm going to just ask each of the stakeholder groups to give a 1-minute wrap up, starting with the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education.
Good afternoon, Chair. The Ministry of Education and its Student Support Services Division, thank you for this opportunity to share our efforts in providing education without traditional face-to-face instruction. As other participants, we strive to balance our roles as advocates for equitable and adequate education for all, including our most marginalized and those with special education needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your grace under fire. To Mrs. Sherry-Ann Rollocks-Hackett of the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Education, Innovation and Energy.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to end by saying that we are very thankful here at the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy for this opportunity to be a part of this process, to contextualize as far as Tobago's perspective on this matter of special educational needs in Trinidad and Tobago. I just wanted to say, I wanted to make a statement as far as the registration of students, special needs students, for the SCA examination. I too am a bit stumped at what I heard, but I want to say in Tobago here, we accommodate our students. Usually they come from the school for deaf and speech impairment, and we usually facilitate them. They are facilitated, and we have students currently at our secondary schools who would have done the SCA and would have succeeded and at our schools. So just want to allay the fears of the Tobagonians who are listening. Our students, we encourage it, and they are also part of our system. So thanks very much for the opportunity to make our contribution today.
Thanks for your contribution and presence. Mrs. Griffith of the Private Special Schools Association.
Hello, are you all hearing me any better now?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm using my phone. I would just like to say thank you so much again for this opportunity. We really do appreciate it. There was one thing I just wanted to add, and it would have gone to the Ministry of Education. The private special schools, the registered private special schools who receive the partial funding, we are operating on an expired MOU. So maybe we can have another conversation about that. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and we look forward to more collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Dr. Mahes of Support Autism TNT.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So regarding children with autism and the online learning environment, I want to ask that the Ministry of Education make the following a priority. 1, address the delay in hiring of teachers' aides. 2, make therapy accessible within the school or educational district. 3, make available a list of the pilot schools where the inclusive education policy is supposedly implemented so that stakeholders will be aware of these. And I know this is a bit outside the purview of this committee, but I would like that the Ministry of Education address the fact that the majority of children with autism are not enrolled in an educational institution and have not been receiving an education so far for many years now. And in conclusion, I want to say that the issues raised here today are issues that have been raised by the special needs communities for many years now. And it is becoming quite frustrating that special needs children continue to be denied equal access to an education here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
And I endorse what you just said. Ms. Ghani?
After Dr. Mahesa, it sometimes leaves me a little speechless. Once again, the Down Syndrome Family Network is 9 years old this year. 9 years of advocating, lobbying, and trying to educate and create awareness for persons with Down syndrome. I think that it has, our partners have always been the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development, and the Ministry of Gender and Child Affairs. I think that, there's no excuse at this point in time that children with disabilities do not have access to equal opportunities for education. I think that it is great that we talk. I have been involved for 9 years in talking, but I would like really to see action now for these children before I die. And really and truly, Senator, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. But I look forward to us really moving to the next level and including our children in, the general classroom and educating the public, because many of our parents, themselves do not even understand the disability that their child has. And unless a parent understands, there will not be early intervention. And early intervention is the key to ensuring that they can prepare themselves to go to school and to have an independent lifestyle. Thank you
so much. Mr. Surat?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. And the Blind Welfare Association would like to leave this meeting asking that specific teachers be identified, trained specifically how to teach children who are blind, contract them or put them on the establishment for itinerant teachers so they could go to the different school and work with the student and the teachers. Because not all children who are just blind need student aid. We need itinerant teachers. Learning material must be in a 2D, 3D imaging, so our students specifically in the primary school could learn concepts. And so this is basically what we are. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mundy.
Thank you. I wish to thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to voice our concerns as members of the public special school. We are hoping that the relevant structure be put in place, the type of training. We're not talking about workshops here. We're talking about postgraduate qualifications in the various disabilities in our public special schools. And we're hoping that the scholarships that used to be provided to our staff be resumed, and you will have many itinerant teachers coming out of that system, right? For instance, orientation and mobility, that is not just a 9-week course, or that is basically postgraduate level, master's level, right? So we are talking about serious education here. And we need to remember that the students that you find in the public special schools is basically from, how do I call
Thank
it?
you.
From mild to profound. And many of our schools that are in the public special schools do not and cannot even cater for some of the mild and some of the moderate, much more for the profound. So we need to put things into context. We have to look at the least restrictive environment here for our children with special educational needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. John?
Okay, from the perspective of the school, we too are happy for the opportunity to be part of this process. I hope that this is just the start in terms of productive talks to highlight some of the challenges that special schools and special needs students are faced with. So we look forward to further discussions where special needs students are the focus of attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frederick.
Thank you, Chair, and to the committee, thank you for allowing this presentation today. I also want to echo Mr. Mambi's sentiments that training should not just be about a workshop, but there is a need of partnering with UTT and UWI for postgraduate training and qualifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Ms. Mansiki.
Okay, I too would advocate for specialized training for teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing. It is not enough to just know sign language. There are specialized techniques involved in teaching our children. It was indeed a privilege being a part of this session this morning, and I look forward to continued dialogue with all stakeholders.
Thank you so much. And just to let all our stakeholders know, we thank you for your participation. And if there's additional information that you think the committee can find useful, please feel free to submit it to our secretariat via the conduit through which you were contacted. In closing, I just want to say, we've heard about for decades inclusive education policy, official policy in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a misnomer because it isn't happening. And I make no bones about saying that. It is way too slow in actually happening to the standard that it should. And at this point, given the information I know has been confirmed now that student support services is 20% staffed, it is impossible for it to even begin to make the kind of inroads that it should in terms of providing support for persons with disabilities, students and learners with disabilities. It's almost to the point of institutionalized marginalization now, and it has to stop. Otherwise, it makes no sense we in this country keep singing every creed and race finds an equal place, because every creed and race is not finding an equal place. It was clear by the contributions here today that persons with disabilities and learners with disabilities are being marginalized in many, many different ways. And this is not laying blame at any particular government or political party. It is us as a country marginalizing this vulnerable group and not providing the kind of support on a consistent, sustainable, equitable basis to these persons who are equal citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of the Secretariat, who have provided, as usual, yeoman's service, and all the committee members and the Chairman, Paul Richards, thank you all for your participation, and thanks to our viewers and listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
This committee is now adjourned.